Silhouettes of distant towers falling down.
The new 4th generation BMW X5 is here. The car aims to get better in every sense, and I'm here in the US for its first drive to find out if that has happened. Now, you know you've got a good thing going when you've sold more than 2 million units of a model line across only 3 generations. And so, with the X5, going into the 4th generation, BMW knew it didn't want to mess with the proposition too much, while of course improving on the last car. Now, 2 clear areas that came in as key demands for this new model development, says BMW. 1, a lot of customers, and even the management frankly, wanted the car to be a lot more sporty. And 2, markets like India and China, demands coming in from there to make it even more comfortable. Now that's of course being pulled in 2 different directions, but the engineers say they've managed to create a good balance and offer a fair amount of extra on both those ends. I'm driving the X5 X-Drive 30D. The 3-litre inline 6 makes 260 horses and delivers a healthy 620 Nm. This is essentially a tweaked version of the last X5's 3-litre diesel, and you can do 0 to 100 km per hour in 6.5 seconds. India will also get the X-Drive 40i with a 3-litre inline 6 petrol engine that makes 333 bhp. Now globally, BMW will be offering 2 diesels and 2 petrols at the start. We'll have to wait and see officially, finally, on what gets decided for India, but it seems likely that we'll have one of each. And there is, of course, a plug-in hybrid that's expected globally next year. We won't be getting that in a hurry, but remember, with some of the changes that are happening on the policy front, it's cars like that could just play a flagship role. Very minimal volume, but maximum impact in terms of PR or marketing reach. And so that plug-in hybrid, don't just rule it out completely for India. Maybe not next year, but a couple of years down the line, yeah, you might see it. The car seems a tad less eager than the last one, but lag is reduced now and the power delivery is more linear. You also get the same 8-speed gearbox that remains quick, smooth and effective. Now the previous generation car was already crammed with a fair amount of the electronics on board, especially when the facelift came in a few years ago. But a lot of those systems do see an improvement on this car, and interestingly, it's not just been reserved for the 7 Series. For a change, you're seeing some of those making a first appearance, if you will, for BMW on the X5. Now, I'll get into details on what I'm talking about, but I think one of the things that really stands out for me straight away is the 2-axle air suspension. That is different. It does make things a lot better for you in terms of both the dynamic end of the performance spectrum and also what you can do with the car off-road. Of course, that also means you have to opt for the optional air suspension. It's not standard. On the Indian model though, I suspect it just might be. Now the X5 takes the DSCI electro-hydraulic brake system a little bit further, one step further if you will, from what was first introduced on the 7 Series. So it still works the same way. It's drive-by-wire. It's not a direct link between the pedal and your actual brakes. And the advantage, say BMW engineers, is in extreme dynamic situations where you could have a lot of people lifting their foot off too early in an emergency braking situation, especially when ABS kicks in. In this case, that kind of feedback never travels back to the pedal, and which is why you're likely to be more effective in your braking given this new system.
Silhouettes of distant towers falling down.
The handling is good, but not as good as the last cars. While there is ample agility, the athleticism is a touch lacking.
We will stand.
Now you have active roll stabilization and integral active steering. Of course, all of these fancy terms just adds up to a bunch of more wires running through the system, and of course a lot more software that's controlling everything. So what does that mean for you? Well, quite simply, it makes things a lot easier for you because you require minimum input as a driver, and yet you can get a lot more from the car in dynamic terms. So cornering, or hard cornering especially, like what I had back there was nothing compared to what you might want to push this car into. Well, you can do that with the assurance
Where it also helps is when you take the X5 off-road. And this is where that compromise in dynamic performance starts to fade away. The new X5 is definitely more capable off-road.
So as is customary on most of these SUV driving experiences, there's an instructor, there's a little bit of a forest for an off-road experience with the new X5. Yep, you'll hear the car dinging and doing all sorts of things in here with all the sensors going off. And every once in a while, of course, the instructor telling me what to do on the walkie-talkie as well. But the whole idea here is to just display the capability the new X5 brings in. It is all designed to stay within the limits of this vehicle, of course, but that doesn't stop me from having some fun. So far, it's been pretty tame, but I've been told it might get a little more exciting as I get deeper into the forest.
The X5 finally gets terrain modes: sand, rock, gravel or snow. Since it had rained the previous day, the surface was sticky, slippery and nicely muddy. I selected the X Rocks mode, which raises the car by 40 mm over the standard 214 mm clearance.
So the onboard computer is always telling the all-wheel drive system how much traction and torque to send to which wheel. There's always going to be a complete monitoring of what's happening with the overall chassis and the different axles. So add to that hill descent control and then a whole bunch of other electronics, the different camera views, all of these sensors pinging off every now and then. And I'll tell you what, you're not doing a whole lot more than simply steering for the most part. The part that worries me is when all of that becomes autonomous as well, and I can tell you that's not far away. I hope it doesn't happen too soon though, because it will just completely kill any element of fun that's left in an experience like this.
Yes, the X5 is now more capable as an off-roader, and it offers you good traction, grip and even a decent wading capability. But don't start comparing it with the hardcore 4x4s just yet. The new X5 is a bit bigger now, with 36mm added to its length, 66mm to its width, and it's 19mm more in height terms. The wheelbase has increased by 42mm.
In terms of overall styling attribute, the car will certainly straight away remind you of the X5 that's just bowed out. The third generation car and the fourth, well, they do look kind of similar, but you start to see just a little more tension in that metal. It's got a nice stretched muscular feel to it, and of course there are these distinct elements that straight away tell you that this isn't just a facelift, it is a new generation. The big grille, that's a dead giveaway. Much more modern headlamp cluster, and that new blue X element that's there in the not quite twin rings anymore. That's again what we've started to see more and more. The new X3, the X2, they all have that. But then you start to see that element of muscle, as I said, along the side. I think is where you really pick up on it, because it has this really taut feel. And then, unlike what you've seen from BMW in the past, there's a nice, almost curved line that travels up and then into the tail lamp. Again, the very distinct styling feature on the new X5. The new tail light, I have to say, looks very different. The graphic, the L-shaped graphic, is really nice too, and it makes the rear of the car look kind of wide and more horizontal than it ever did look before.
The electric split tailgate is cool, and the boot gives you 650 to 1870 liters of space, depending on whether you have the seats folded up or down.
It's certainly a really fresh cabin for the X5, and even though there are certain elements here in styling terms that you've started to see on the other X models, like the X2 or the X3, this is still certainly really very new. The two screens really dominate that, both 12.3 inch and this one, of course, very new, because compared to the last X5, everything changes. And this is also the first BMW model to get the latest 7.0 operating system from BMW. And so what that means is completely new interface, very intuitive touch screen, different layout. You're going to find this really more modern and a lot more pleasing and sort of fun and young compared to the iDrive that you've been used to seeing. Lots of functions on the virtual cluster as well, and the layout, I have to say the graphics, really nice. They complement that big, huge, muscular grille up front and all of that muscle that you see running around on the metal. Well, you kind of get a sense of that from the layout here on the instrument cluster, and I like that. You do see similar angular elements down here. As you come further down, there's a little screen that gives you the temperature control, and of course those shortcut keys that we've started getting used to now from BMW. And then the volume control, the gear shift, the iDrive, and also the start-stop button have this glass element. That's certainly very new and different for BMW. The cup holders, you can have them be either cooling or heating depending on the kind of drink you put in there. So if it's a cup of coffee, you can keep it warm. If it's a nice cold cola, well, you can keep it chilled. So that's new. Wireless charging is optional, and that finally, of course, has started to become more or less available across most of the premium products. Lots of USB charging points, including the mini USB, the C points as well. 2 USBs in the back, panoramic sunroof. I could go on because, of course, the list of features is endless. One last thing though, there's a shortcut key now for the massage function for the front seats. That is certainly new, and you do get ventilation for cooling and of course heating for the seats as well.
There is the option of the third row of seats, and getting there is easier with row 2 now folding up electrically to allow access to the rear. The Bowers & Wilkins Diamond Surround sound system with 20 speakers and a 1500 watt output is good too. And besides the ambient air package, ambient lighting, you also get the panorama glass roof that has the Sky Lounge feature with LED graphics embedded into the glass. All of this from the 7 Series.
Now, a bunch of us have been driving the car today, and we have an interesting split on the character of this engine. The 3-liter inline-6 diesel, I think it sounds great because it sounds a lot more refined than the last car. A lot of people like the growl on the last one, so like I said, we have a little bit of a split vote on that, but yeah, I like it because I think that sense of refinement coming through so definitely is something that buyers in this particular segment will appreciate, especially with the buyers who are looking for a little bit of extra in terms of performance. They want that punch, and yet they don't want to spend on the top spec version. So the 30D will, I think, pretty much make up a bulk of sales, of course in India, but perhaps in Europe as well.
I really liked the sound, and it egged me on to push the car further. Spending the many hours driving the new X5 here in Georgia has given me enough confidence to say that BMW has done enough to worry rivals. The new BMW X5 will arrive in India only late next year, but 2019 promises to bring us a lot of bimmer SUVs. The X5, of course, the X4, and maybe the X2. And then there will be the mighty X7 too that will follow.